Well, thank you everyone for joining us. We have a wealth of information to share with you tonight, me and Joe, and we're going to be trading off as we go, but I'm going to be starting us off. Does anyone have any questions before we start? All right, let's get started. All right, so I will start by talking in general about the AES GreenSpace program and how you might. Firstly, the whole notion of the program is tied to three main goals, and those are to connect people to nature, create vibrant places rooted in community, and build lasting value by working together. These goals tie these goals tie into our overarching theme of placemaking, community, and habitat restoration. And our hope is that through this process, we are creating spaces that will be community supported and add to the overall quality of life of a neighborhood. So, what does placemaking mean to KIB? Well, placemaking can mean a lot of things. Some within the sector say that placemaking was more effective when it's done lighter, quicker, or cheaper. However, as Joe likes to joke, these processes are more heavier, slower, and more expensive. And this is due to the fact that we are taking our time to work with the community to ensure that everything from the design, engagement, and implementation is grassroots driven. And there always may be a debate of whether it is form over function by asking the question, is it the beautification aspects that we are focusing on, or is it the actual functionality of the space? And the answer is that the project can be very flexible. It is highly dependent on the end goal of the project and what a community is looking to get out of it. But usually we try to find a balance between the two and try to make the space both beautiful and functional. As KIB has progressed with the GreenSpace program, we have shifted our ways of thinking to ask, what are the essential elements needed to create vibrant places? This is all boiled down to these 5 points. First, we want communities to be engaged and involved in not just the design and implementation, but also the care and impact of the space. This is why we put a strong emphasis on the engagement work so that we have the opportunity to bring communities along with us through the entire process. Second is reflecting on the heritage, culture, and value of the community. We don't have a one-size-fits-all approach when it comes to making a green space. And this means that we understand that neighborhoods have unique histories and stories that should be reflected on and shared. Third is the 4 seasons approach. We want to ensure that a space is effective and accessible 365 days a year. As we know, in Indiana, weather can be very unpredictable. And so we want to make sure that we plan ahead and include elements of the design that lends to those elements of unpredictability. Fourth, it is very important for KIB to help others understand the importance of native plants. There are a lot of benefits with native plants concerning the beauty of native plants, but also how they benefit the environment around them in terms of birds, plants, bees, insects, who all benefit from the presence of native plants. And lastly, we want to ensure that the spaces we create are functional, beautiful, distinctive, and resilient.
Sorry about that.
Okay. So as we are thinking through your application, there are some things that we really try and highlight and help you consider. First, how will your project be spatially designed? What will this space or area look like? Are there already built environments near or within the space that you will interact with? Is there a natural waterway nearby? All these elements are really integral to the functionality of your space. Second, what is the purpose of your space? What will it be used for? Is this space of gathering, thus it may want to be a little bit bigger? Is this a place of meditation and relaxation where it might be more intimate or quiet? Third, it is good to think about your space in relation to the surrounding environments and structures. Is the surrounding space residential? Is it commercial, recreational? And how may your space tie into and promote the surrounding area? And fourth, how will this space continue to be used? Because we want to make sure that we are creating spaces that are not only beautiful, but that can be used and enjoyed by the community. So as we continue to speak on placemaking, there's an organization called Projects for Public Places that is based in New York, which focuses on placemaking theory. And some of the slides of this PowerPoint are utilized from the resources because they illustrate very well the types of placemaking that we are trying to create. In this photo, we have two different projects, one on top and one on bottom. And the one on the top, we see that it is an open space, trees within a space. There are benches, but the engagement of the space is a bit lacking. Unlike the one on the bottom, who has much higher degree of human interaction. And that may be because on the bottom, there seems to be a bit more space for interaction. You see the shade of the sidewalks, the kids on the bikes, people walking their dogs, shopping, etc. And when we zoom into the bottom photo, we see all of these things that are happening within the space. And what Project for Public Places likes to emphasize is the power of 10, meaning you have great placemaking opportunities when you have 10 things to do within a space. So in this picture, you have window shopping, riding a bike, walking, petting a dog, sitting and relaxing. And what this creates is a continuous opportunity for gathering and enjoyment. So as you are drafting the concepts for your space, I would encourage you to think about these 10 concepts and these 10 things to do within your space and how you would be able to implement them and sustain them. Now, when we look at placemaking on a larger scale, again, we are in New York and Bryant Park, I believe. While we would not be making a space this large with our GreenSpace program, this diagram does a wonderful job of making it clear all the different things you can do within the space. We see the lawn, we see the cafe, a carousel, sidewalks, and while we can't do something as large scale as a carousel, we do want to create a place that speaks to your individual desires and lends to your sense of creativity.
There we go.
Earlier, when we were discussing how to consider the area around your space, this is kind of exactly what we mean. Not just the 10 things you can do within the space, but what are the interactions that the space has with its surroundings? So as the slide shows, this protected space is reaching out like an octopus, with all of its arms reaching out to the residents, businesses, organizations, surrounding areas, while having the option to draw others into the space as well. And as we continue interacting with you, we want you to consider these questions for your space as well.
Rebecca, did I see that you had a hand raised in the participants?
Yes. I just wanted to ask, I love that I don't know if it was the power of 10 or those 10 different aspects. Would you call the space that was above it then like a space you'd prefer not to have? Or was that still like a sufficient space, even though it didn't have the 10 things to do?
Like this one here, you're saying, versus this one?
Yes.
Sure. Iasia, did you want to cover that or do you want me to?
I'll let you.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I think the idea is obviously we want to create a space that works for the neighborhood, and we're going to take the direction from you guys to kind of inform us what you would like to see in the space. And so some of our green spaces are definitely a little bit more passive, like this one on top, gateways and so forth. And then there's a lot of our spaces that are more active like this, that are pocket parks and places for gathering and so forth. I think by and large, what we would like to know is if if you are looking at a more passive space, then let's talk about that in your application and make sure we clearly understand your vision. Because if that's really what you want, and it could still be a very helpful and a good space for your community, that's fine. We can go ahead and create that. But otherwise, we do want to help encourage folks to, if we're going to create a green space or a pocket park, to really think about how it could be most interactive with the community with this kind of power of 10 philosophy. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, and as I discussed earlier, the concept is very flexible. So maybe you already have a space within your neighborhood that is highly active, but you're looking for a place of restoration and relaxation. And in that concept, then of course a space like this would be, great for that community.
Right. Cool. Thanks for the question. This is great. Keep it going, guys.
Now I would go into very briefly into the design process. While KB doesn't expect communities to come to the table with all of their designs fleshed out with details, we do want you to start thinking about who will be involved in your project and how. That is because we base our placemaking development off of community-based leadership, meaning you will tell us what you want in your space, not the other way around. And it will be happening on a variety of levels and ways. First, by identifying a place, then evaluating the issues that may come with the space, and then crafting a vision, and then asking what is the space being used for, and what are the short and long-term goals of the space. And lastly, consider how your team will be taking care of the space and the responsibilities surrounding maintenance. Also, it is important to note that KB offers a maintenance assistance for up to 2 years after the implementation of a space to make sure your community understands what the needs of the space are and how to maintain them. Here are a couple of before and after shots we wanted to share with you to illustrate some of the ideas we've implemented in the past. Here is a picture of Pagebrook Park, I believe. This picture was taken on a not so good day. It was a bit of flooding, but then the next slide, we see how we've worked with the community and figured out what they want, how they wanted to do it, and ended up making this beautiful space with the neighborhood. And interesting enough, Pagebrook Park was named after a local girl who unfortunately passed away within the neighborhood. And so the community was looking for a way to memorialize her, and their way for this was to come together and create this beautiful park. And so as we are preparing, or as you are preparing to apply for your project, here are some things that we'd like you to keep in mind. First is identifying your project. Where will it be? It could be a vacant lot. It can be an underutilized space within your neighborhood, a median that you want turned into a green space, a combination of meditative, recreational, community-based land that's shared, a space that is really essential to your community that you want to develop into a more utilized space. Next is identifying your team. Who will be involved and to what capacity will they be involved? Will it be financially, capacity-wise? Will they provide volunteers? What can and will they bring to the table? And then lastly is building connectedness. Who among your team will bring expertise? What businesses can donate resources? Who will be involved with this project that will add to its overall quality, interpretation, and effectiveness? And now I would turn over to Joe to speak on neighborhood capacity.
Yeah, great. So thank you, Asia. So as we're going through this, I would just want to add one more bullet to the previous slide too, is you're working on your application, please don't hesitate to contact or reach out to Asia or myself, because we'd be more than happy to work with you, continue to point out some good pointers for you to include in your application and so forth. And these folks here in Windsor Park were successful with creating 2 separate green space projects with us. And I think that's partly because they got really involved with KIB, and they also worked together as a team. And I think that goes right alongside with what Iasia was just mentioning. with understanding that we want to get a lot of folks to be involved with this. Don't just work with the people that you know and work with, but invite your neighbors, and get folks who you may not necessarily interact with all the time in your neighborhood, and invite them to be part of this process, because eventually we are going to want to try to do that anyway, to get their voices heard in this process. So we're talking about neighborhood capacity. As Iasia mentioned, we have a 3-year commitment. So this is a big deal for us. This is, of all of our programs, this is probably the one that requires the most energy and most commitment from our neighbors, because of that long-term care and maintenance of these spaces. KIB will help create that space with you in the first year, and then continue to work with you in the next 2 years after that. We'll also want to just, even after those 2 years, we just want to make sure we continue to develop our relationship with all these spaces. So even after that point, we will continue to be inviting you to be involved through our Green Keepers program, and be supportive of you with your space, and making sure it's still being able to be maintained. Not just are we thinking about your neighborhood capacity to be able to take care of a space, but let's also think about the site capacity. So funny story here on this one. This is Bauman Park in Bates Hendricks. As you can see here, this is after we kind of got into the project a little bit before we were involved. This was 4 lots with turf on top. We awarded the project. We were excited to get out there and start working. Went out there with our shovels one day, just kind of started doing some testing and kind of figuring out what's going on underneath the soil. And I kid you not, about 6 inches underneath the soil, underneath that grass, we hit asphalt. We hit asphalt on every single spot of this property. It was just, it was terrible. Such a surprise. So we've learned now that we need to be making sure that we work with you guys as applicants ahead of time to know what is underneath your land. So that way, when we start digging, we know that we're going to be able to plant trees and plants that will survive in more than 6 inches of soil. Not to mention, we wanted to do other things here. We wanted to put in a play set, and back where you see the bulldozer underneath the trees there, that used to be like an electrical hub station, and underneath that were all of these big foundational boulders or rocks, big foundations. Again, we didn't quite know the full extent of the site and what was happening underneath the ground when we awarded this. But when we found these, we thought we could try to excavate them and remove them from the site. But we realized quickly it was way too heavy and we weren't going to be able to do that. So we actually ended up incorporating them into the design of the space. The group that we worked with was called Building Blocks. And they wanted to have this play set in the back here. So we put these big boulders or building blocks back in the back along the alley to help protect from cars driving and help the kids be a little bit more safe in that back space. So we incorporated that into the design of the park, and it all worked out well. But definitely something we want to make sure that all of you are considering when we think about the space. So here's another issue that we want to make sure that we mention for you guys to kind of keep in mind: site ownership. For all of our projects, we're going to ask you guys to work on an MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, that you'll sign with us as we get into the project. And part of that MOU will be having the site owner sign the MOU so that they can make sure that they're part of the process. There have been some issues and situations in the past where we've created the space, we've fundraised, we've gotten funders behind it. And then, not too long later, a few years later, that space is literally paved over. And so we want to make sure that our investment, the community's investment, is long lasting. We need to make sure that that owner of the site is on board with the project. In a little bit, Iasia will start going over some of our program values, which will help guide you through the application process and give you some pointers about things to keep in mind as you answer those questions. We review all of our projects based on those program values, but we also try to insert some subjective or objectivity rather into this application process as well through our maps and mapping. So we will put each of our applications up along the map and then decide, is it within a reconnecting to our waterway area? Is it within a quality of life neighborhood? Does the project partner actually own the lot or have a relationship with that owner? How many trees might have we planted in and around that space? So there's a lot of these different factors that we're going to try to take into account when we're scoring these applications. Rebecca, I see a hand raised.
Yeah, could you explain what a quality of life neighborhood is?
Right on. Absolutely. So quality of life neighborhoods are those neighborhoods that have worked with, oftentimes it's been funded by LISC, and have put together plans for their neighborhood that will help guide them in improving the various pieces that are important to that neighborhood. So whether it's regarding the environment or education, maybe access to businesses and so forth. This plan is a holistic approach to helping overall improving that quality of life. KIB has been identified in a number of these plans to help the neighborhoods out. And so oftentimes we want to align our goals with those neighborhoods to be supportive. And so if we are in one of these neighborhoods, then obviously they'll get maybe a couple extra bonus points. That makes sense?
Awesome. Yes, thank you.
Great. Not every project will require soil testing, but if we are hoping to have a playground in that space where there'll be kids, running around, maybe even eating or tasting dirt. If we are going to be planting a community garden within that space or having that be part of the overall project, we will probably require to have some sort of soil testing done. And if your project is one of those types of projects, we can certainly work with you. We have a relationship with Health and Hospital in Marion County where those tests can be done for free, and as well as with IUPUI actually as well. And so we can help get that done to make sure that we have a safe space that is going to be good for that kind of use. All right, and I'm going to pass it back over to Iasia.
All right. So we are now going to do a quick overview of our GreenSpace program values. The first two are placemaking and community. And we've talked a bit about placemaking already, but we want to continue to emphasize that the design of the project is intended to promote interaction that raises the spirit of the neighborhood. So we want to ask the questions of how can we do this in such a way that uplifts the mentality and heritage of your community. And with community, what will this project bring together, considering neighborhoods and residents, and how will it create new partnerships between your neighborhood and businesses and organizations and local gathering halls as well? And how can we build capacity through this? We want to make sure to highlight all of these elements within your application. One of our values that we put a lot of emphasis on is environment. So much that you will receive a half point for each one of these elements, which is air, soil, water, invasive removal, the impact on wildlife. So how can this impact the birds, the bees, the butterflies, and elements of change? How big is the element of change within your project? With maintenance, we want to ask, what are the short and long-term goals and needs for the space? For example, if we're planting plants, we need water. Where will the water come from? As we're planting plants, there comes weeds. Who will be in charge of taking care of the weeds? If we are installing art, which is in this picture, what happens if the art is damaged, if it's broken, vandalized? Who is in charge with having it cleaned, replaced, repaired? These are all things that we want to consider when we're adding elements of a green space so that nothing goes through neglect or disarray. As we previously stated, we want our green space to be interesting 365 days a year. And a way to accomplish this is through public art. or interpretive panels that exemplify the history or heritage of a neighborhood or organization. We want to make sure that you began to consider what is your story and how do you want to tell it. And lastly is the lasting value. How do we create a space that will be alive and vital to the neighborhood? And how might we program around that to keep it interesting and engaging as years go by and come? And I don't know, Joe, if you want to talk about this structure that we created in Speedway and the story behind it.
Oh, yeah, sure. Just real quick. I'll just say this is a great space. So not only for seasons, but also at night sometimes as well. This is right across from the Indianapolis 500. We designed this with a local artist. He worked very closely with the Arts Council of Speedway and with the community. They designed this based off of a flower that is the city flower in the city in Japan, which is the sister city with Speedway. And so that was the crux of the design itself. But then even the fabrication of each one of those little lights, those were all created and made with students and other neighbors in the town of Speedway. So it was a pretty fantastic project, and definitely one that I would recommend you go visit. It's right on the circle, on the roundabout there, southwest of the racetrack. So, okay. So I guess this is my last part of the presentation, where we go through a quick synopsis of what it's like once you are awarded a project, what happens. And this way kind of gives everybody kind of a sense about what to expect. And then after this, we'll open it up for some questions. But this is one of my favorite projects that I had the chance to work on. It's up in Devington, which is basically just north of 42nd Street and, or 46th Street, I'm sorry, 46th and Arlington. The neighborhood decided that they had this bus stop right here at the corner of Staunton and Arlington. They wanted to make it a more interesting bus stop, something that would make it more fun to wait for the bus, and to also connect it with some nearby development that was going on. So the local neighborhood worked with a resident from that neighborhood who actually owned a design company, a company called With Purpose, to start brainstorming, thinking through. And this was even before they applied. So not every applicant needs to do this. KIB will hire a landscape architect to work with you to develop that. But in this particular neighborhood, they started to think kind of creatively and what they wanted to see. They wanted to create an inviting natural space. They wanted to have that space reflective of neighborhood pride. They wanted to be sustainable, so it could be cared for long term. And they also wanted to create some connectivity. Obviously, the bus stopping there, reducing crime, and helping people feel safe in their neighborhood. As I said, just about a half a block down from the bus stop was this new development that was being proposed from a local developer. And they were going to build this new structure on top of an apartment complex that was currently there. This is that apartment that was there prior. The story goes is that this whole neighborhood and those apartments really were the source of a lot of crime and a couple of shootings, actually. So it was pretty traumatic for the neighborhood. So this new development was very much welcomed by the Devington neighborhood. That would help kind of bring some fresh life and try to bring them safer neighborhood to the area. So they worked very closely with the developer. But before they actually demolished these structures to build a new one, I want to highlight to you this right here. I think I have a zoom in here, fancy PowerPoint. These blocks right here, I wanted to call that out because if you might recall from the design that we showed earlier, they wanted to utilize some of the pieces from this old development and this old apartment into the space for the apartment. So a little salvage preservation going on. And that's exactly what we did. We worked very closely with the local designer from that neighborhood to relook at that design that they had come up with a design that we could actually implement with them. and incorporated some of these pieces and elements that they had wanted to incorporate. So here you see those same blocks from that old apartment being incorporated into this space. And another piece were the pup seats. So here they are again, the blocks up close, and then the pup Busch Stadium seats that they wanted to incorporate into the design of the space. Of course, as we were working with them, they wanted to make sure that they were promoting this as much as possible. So here you see Will, he was our designer with purpose, with Andre Garson. And so it was really great for them to invite folks who would not have otherwise been able to known about this project, but to get them to be part of the process. And this gentleman here, he was the designer for or the owner of the company who designed and built the new apartment complex. So once you're awarded the application, we'll work with you on that design. We're going to have a couple of workshops. I don't know yet if we're going to have those in person or not, but time will tell. We'll see. But either way, we will definitely have some sort of an opportunity to share with you and work with you to kind of develop those ideas further. Those workshops will also lead into additional community meetings where we will work with you to connect with as many residents as possible to invite them to come in. And here you see Will. He is a resident, but also the designer of the project, but he's also flanked with a couple of colleagues from the neighborhood who are all, even despite the photograph, as excited as you could get for this project, I think. So it was a very exciting project to work on with all of those guys. Not only did we work with members of the community, but we also reached out to students at the nearby Arlington High School. We did design charrettes with the students so they can have some say and some input into the process. And we also invited them out to help us build the space as well. And here you see, during the wintertime, it's probably a little too cold to go out and start working on the space itself. But if there is some hardscape work that we can do to the project, we will start doing that in the winter. And so here you see the students working on those concrete blocks, painting them inside the school, and getting those ready for installation come spring and summer. The other thing we did with the students, which was fantastic, was we wanted to, again, if you remember, we wanted to have this space reflective of the local culture and community. So we brainstormed with them, what is it that you would like to have on the actual bus stop itself? We were thinking about putting some decals, window decals on the screen or on the windows. And so the school helped us, the students helped us kind of brainstorm what they wanted to install there. And what we ended up coming up with was some butterflies that were going up against a quote from Maya Angelou that was helping to illustrate that quote from her poem. So again, once we do that design process, we're getting the input from as many neighbors and students and youth as possible. Then comes spring and summertime. This is when we are going to break ground and start working on the implementation of that space with you. So here you see photographs of ourselves with some community members and other volunteers who have come out to the space to start building the actual bus stop. Here we are laying down those blocks, putting them into the space itself. Being very careful about it all. I was out there those days. I would also say it was helpful to have a restaurant right across the street for lunch, which was much needed. So if you know of other restaurants in your neighborhood that are good for all of our volunteers to go and visit after a hard day's work, that's always a fun piece to add to the work days. And here you see the finished product. So after a long time of working on that process through the summer, the aim is to hopefully finish these projects by the end of the year. So for you guys who are applying this year, your applications will go in May. We'll hopefully award those applications around Labor Day, start working on that design and engagement process through the fall and into winter, implementation in the spring and summer, completing it, planting it, finishing off all that finishing touches in November. So that way we have a space that's finished by the end of 2022. And then here you could see the quote from Maya Angelou with the butterflies and some caterpillars that we had on that space as well. And that brings us to our very last slide, I believe, or one more. But this just is a quick quote from Henry David Thoreau, just about talking about placemaking in his own words, putting a value in life onto a space, making it our own, and finding happiness in that place and for ourselves and for our community. And that is what we want to try to bring with this program, with you guys helping us. So I think with that, pass this back over to Iasia to wrap us up.
Yeah. So I think that was the last slide. We are really happy that you were able to join us tonight. Does anyone have any questions as of now? Since I know we threw a lot of information at you, but are there any questions that you may have? No. All right. You have any closing thoughts, Joe or Rebecca?
I don't have anything else.
All right. If no one has any other questions, then I will give you back the rest of this beautiful day.
Thank you guys so much.
Have a great evening.
Thank you.
No problem. Have a great night, guys.
Thank you.
Goodbye.